If you buy the wrong Ottawa condo right now, you could lose tens of thousands of dollars. And the people who are telling you that we've already hit the bottom, I don't think are looking at the same numbers as I am. Now, I pull the data every single month, and the stuff that I'm looking at says that the condos still have room to fall. Not every single condo and not every single buyer situation, but that's the part I think we do a bad job of talking about sometimes. Inside Ottawa's condo market, there are really a few smaller markets that are operating independently from each other. And depending on which one you're shopping in, this is either a real window of opportunity or a financial trap. So in this video, I'm going to show you what the numbers are actually saying, which condos are at risk, and how to tell which side of that line that you're on. Now, let me make this real with a story before I go ahead and get into the numbers. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago who purchased a condo last year, and their circumstances have changed. They're now in a position where they have to sell. Unfortunately, the property values in that particular area have gone down pretty significantly in the year, and there's tons of competition on the market. And they're now in a position where they're going to have to either stay in a property that doesn't make sense for them or take a big financial loss on selling and moving into something that does. That kind of situation is the exact trap that we're trying to avoid here. And it happens differently depending on which side of the deal that you're on. If you're buying, the mistake is treating the "we're at the bottom" rhetoric as fact and then rushing in to try to time the market. Whereas if you're selling, the mistake is pricing to last year's market conditions and then chasing the market down from there because prices have come down. It's the same root cause either way, not understanding which section of the condo market that you're in and how that affects how the market behaves. Now, very quickly, one definition you're going to need for any of these charts to make sense, and one that you might know already if you've watched the channel before, is months of inventory, which is the number that we get when we take the number of properties that are sitting on the market at the end of the month in a specific section and divide it by the number of properties that sold in that same period. It gives us a measure of absorption, and to me, it's one of the best leading indicators of where the market and prices are going. Now, as I was saying earlier, there are distinct markets within the Ottawa condo market. I've got freehold townhomes here first, just as for comparison. Obviously, that's not a section of the condo market, but you can see here we've got 2.4 months of inventory, which puts us firmly in to seller's market territory. These freehold townhomes often have 3 bedrooms, things like a finished basement in many cases, a backyard. All of that kind of thing is really appealing to a lot of people right now, and those properties are moving pretty quickly. Next up, we have condo townhomes, which is 3.8 months of inventory, just sneaking in technically into seller's market territory, but they are sitting considerably longer than the freehold townhomes. And then the real loser here is apartment condos. We've got 5 months of inventory here, and honestly, this is looking like it's climbing. Compared to the last couple years, this is elevated, and anybody who's buying or selling in the condo market right now will tell you that this reflects reality. Apartment condos are very, very difficult to sell right now. And the key takeaway here is just to illustrate the different sections of the market. The way we track data in Ottawa is often we look at condos or freeholds as a block, or we look at single detached versus townhomes versus apartments as a block. And within those categories, we've got different things going on. And the main story you can take from this is regardless of whether or not there's a condo fee, if you've got a property that has a yard and a little more space that works for more lifestyles, even if it is something that has a condo fee, it's not going to perform as well as a freehold house, but it's going to perform considerably better than an apartment condo where you've got that high condo fee and you're dealing with all the issues that can come up with living in a building rather than living in something that feels more like a house. And this next chart is why I'm pretty hesitant to call the bottom. If we look at the months of inventory history over the last few years, I've got the freehold townhomes here again, just as a baseline to compare it to. But this is also the case with the detached market. We've got months of inventory that has stayed well under the 4-month mark, which tells us 4 months is generally what we use to tell whether or not we're in a seller's market. So we peaked a little bit in the later parts of especially 2023, but we stayed pretty steady and landed at 2.4 in the most recent month of May 2026. By contrast, if we look at the 3-year trend for apartment condos specifically, we can see we actually started At least when we get to the spring section or summer section here, we're actually pretty close together as far as months of inventory. But we go up seasonally. We'll come back down again in the busier part of the year and then go up and come down not quite to the level where we were the prior year. And that was especially the case this year. We saw a crazy peak in December. Now, these crazy peaks can happen in December because there's such a small sample size. There's so few transactions that happen that the numbers can get a little bit wonky. And that definitely happened this past year. So don't read too much into that. But you can see we came down, and where we landed kind of at the best of times for this year was around 5, which was May. And we're already starting to climb up from April. So April was actually the lowest month for months of inventory for apartment condos. But you can see we're already starting to trend back up, and we didn't really come down to where we got to in the spring of 2025. So the month over month numbers look encouraging for months of inventory, but year over year, we're not seeing that same reason for optimism. And we can see it reflected here in the price as well. So this is what we see when we have 5 months of inventory in the spring. Here's the impact it has on prices. And you can see that's been telling a real story over the last year. So we've got things kind of holding steady throughout the spring of last year. Prices went up a little bit. They went down a little bit as we approached the later part of the year. And then they popped a little bit this spring, but they have not come anywhere close to where the prices were last year. So the benchmark price is actually down about $70,000, 6.7% from last year for apartment condos. And that price decrease has not been the same for the freehold properties. And this is the benchmark price, which is from the home price index. This is better than the average price. It controls for the outliers, and it's a much more reliable number. So this is something that I think is definitely worth being concerned about. And I think there's every reason to be concerned that these property values could go down more because the months of inventory hasn't really abated. And as I was saying, months of inventory to me is the best leading indicator of where prices are going. Now, the obvious and super understandable question that comes up after looking at data like this is, if prices are in the process of falling, why would anybody buy a condo right now? Why not just wait till the bottom? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that nobody rings a bell when we get to the bottom of the market. We don't know when it's going to be. And even people like us who watch the market all the time will only be able to tell you when it's happened a few months after we have gotten there. And then there's also another type of buyer where the bottom doesn't really matter. There's two people I would say yes to right now. The first one is the investor who can genuinely hold on to the property for a long period of time. The second is the end user who's actually planning to live there and stay for years, not just a quick stop or stepping stone on the way to a property that makes more sense for them long term. If your timeline is long enough, today's price is just the entry point, and the wobble between now and when we turn the corner and when you eventually sell doesn't really matter. That's the difference between investing and gambling, which is what a lot of people were doing when the market was going nowhere but up in 2020 to 2022. So who would I tell to wait? It would be anybody who might need to sell in the next couple of years. You don't want to be forced to sell into this market segment right now and end up like the person I was talking about earlier in the video. And if you buy, the individual building almost matters more than the price. Make sure you read the status certificate and the reserve fund study before anything else. A thin reserve fund or a looming special assessment can cost you more than any discount that you negotiate on the price. Some of these buildings are going to be poor long-term investments no matter how cheap you can get them for. The price tag isn't the biggest risk, the balance sheet and the reserve fund is. If you're a long-term investor or an end user, buying in a well-run building with a healthy reserve fund is not a bad play at all. It's actually a great opportunity. Today's price is the entry point. You buy with your eyes wide open and don't lose sleep over what happens in the next few months or couple of years because you're holding it for the long term. The people who absolutely should not buy these sorts of properties right now are people who are trying to time the market for a quick gain. If you're looking at a building with a really thin reserve fund, or if you're somebody who thinks you might have to move within the next year or two, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to appreciate on that condo and make any money. If you're somebody who's looking to sell an apartment condo into this market, just know that you are selling into the weakest segment in the city. Now, like I said at the beginning, I'd rather you hear this now than have you learn the expensive lesson. There's a lot of noise out there telling you that this is the bottom, and I'm just not convinced that that's the case. Time will tell whether or not I end up actually being right. A condo can still be a great buy in this city. You just have to make sure you're buying the right product on the right timeline.